This episode of the Best Armies in Warhammer 40k is sponsored by Wicked Dicey and their Summer Slaughter GT. More about them later on in the video. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and this is another episode of the Best Armies in Warhammer 40k, the weekly video series where we go through undefeated results from the past week and talk about what's winning. This episode is for the weekend of July 12th and 13th, 2025, and we didn't have quite as many results to go over because this was a huge weekend for team events with multiple large, major, super major sized team events going down throughout the world. Now, we are covering specifically today singles events. However, if you want to watch some team coverage, please go check out my coverage of the ATC 8-player team championships. I'm currently on the road in Chattanooga, Tennessee after covering that event, so I'm recording from my hotel room right now. I hope that the audio isn't too bad, but we got to watch 5 rounds of some of the best North American teams duke it out for the ATC championship. If you want to watch smaller event sizes, War Games Live was also there with me covering it and covering the 5-player team championship. So lots of Warhammer 40k content to go around between those two live streams. But in any case, let's dive in and discuss singles events for the weekend as we get to a metagame breakdown. Now, I'm going to level with you. I don't think much of the results here are going to be surprising if you're paying attention to the metagame. Both Imperial Knights and Chaos Knights have absolutely swept things up. Imperial Knights with no less than 4 undefeated results this week, 2 at the Ciudad de Avila, 1 at the 3rd annual Rock Hard GT. That was an X0-1 tying for first place in a natural draw, actually, for the finals of that one, which was pretty wild, plus 1 at Brawl in the Hall. Chaos Knights nipping right at their heels at DPW Turnering, Rise of the Fallen, Beach Class Major, and Hell Pit GT. Death Guard also, unsurprisingly, doing very well with 3 undefeated results at the Saskatchewan Open, Midsummer OPA, and Rose City Rumble. Now, we also had a couple other factions come out of the woodwork, like Thousand Suns, which with their new codex, despite getting some recent nerfs in last week's update, were still able to take down 2 events at the Brighton GT and Rose City Rumble. Interestingly, we saw 2 undefeated results from Drukhari of all factions, a little bit of an offshoot there, but they are maybe starting to see some success from their new Reaper's Wager updates, which is cool. At the Ciudad de Avila, as well as the 3rd annual Rock Hard GT, that was the other draw for the finals. Tau Empire also having 2 undefeated results at Midsummer OPA and the Viking Games event. Now, from there, we also had 2 results from Space Marines, 2 separate Space Marine chapters, however. Blood Angels at the Warhammer July Open, Ultramarines at the Silver State Major. That was a very spicy Ultramarine list, though, so I'm excited to talk about that one. Adeptus Custodes took down the Ironweld Summer Assault. That's another Wicked Dicey event, by the way, so shout out to our episode sponsors this time around. Necrons winning the Nemesis 40k Summer, and last but certainly not least, Orks took down the Geek Shack Farewell Taylor GT with none other than their newly updated detachment, the Cult of Speed. We're definitely going to be diving deep into that event and the results there because that is a wild one. Now, with that, let's get into the lists in specific just after a word from our sponsor. This video is sponsored by Wicked Dicey and their upcoming Summer Slaughter event. Now, I talk about Wicked Dicey quite a lot on this channel, and that's because they run phenomenal events in the northeast sector of the United States. I've promoted a ton of their events in the past, I've been to a ton of their events in the past, and I've live streamed a bunch of them, and they're always a good time. Summer Slaughter in particular is taking place the weekend of August 16th and 17th, 2025 in Piscataway, New Jersey. And this event features a wide variety of miniature games, including tournaments for games like Warhammer 40,000, Age of Sigmar, War Machine and Hordes, Marvel Crisis Protocol, and many more. Most pertinent for this channel, of course, is going to be the Summer Assault Major that is being held at the event, a 64-player GT that will take place over 5 rounds. But if competitive Warhammer 40k isn't necessarily your style, there are a lot of other activities to engage in, including a 2-day narrative event for the Horus Heresy. If you can't make the event in person, you'll still be able to experience it on this channel. I'll be live streaming both days of the 40k GT. However, I highly recommend that you actually go there because I'd love to see you in person, not just in chat. You can find links for more information as well as the Best Coast Pairings event for the 40k GT down in the video description. So get your tickets today for the Summer Slaughter, August 16th and 17th, 2025, and I'll see you there. Now, with that, we're going to start with one of the largest singles event of the weekend, the Ciudad de Evila. This was a 100-player major being held in Spain, and while Spain does love its team events, they actually took a week off for this one to play a singles event. Now, this one was won by Imperial Knights and also saw a runner-up 5-0 result, also from Imperial Knights, as well as this Drukhari result, which I'm very excited to talk about later on in the episode. We're going to start with OUX, who took down the event with the Knight faction. Now, this player was playing a Noble Lance featuring 4 super heavy knights. This included Canis Rex, 2 Cerastus Knight Atropos. Those are very popular right now because of their bonuses they gain against opposing Titanic units. When you are in a metagame that is absolutely inundated with knights and Imperial Knights, having access to a model that gains so many bonuses against other super heavies is a huge deal. So those Cerastus Knight Atropi are always around. We then, interestingly, also have a Knight Errant. That guy rocking Mysterious Guardian and a Thermal Cannon. Now, the Knight Errant gains +1 to hit when targeting the closest enemy, and you can set up those drops really easily with the Mysterious Guardian enhancement. So what you can do is pick this guy up off the battlefield, drop him down 9 inches away from enemies, but within 12, which is the melted distance of its Thermal Cannon. You then gain +1 to hit against the target, so you're hitting on 2s, re-rolling 1 hit roll potentially, and you're wounding other Knight chassis profiles, other super heavies on 3s now that their defensive stat lines have been changed at a huge bonus. These really aggressive close-range thermal cannon builds are actually very popular both for Imperial and for Chaos Knights. We also see things like double thermal cannon despoilers gaining some play because of this ability to just leap on an opposing super heavy and crack them for an enormous amount of damage. We then have a bunch of smaller armigers, 4 armiger Helverins to provide backline shooting and a little bit of additional objective control to the army. They also give you a ton of wounds just passively on the battlefield. 4 times 14 wounds, so 56 total wounds with a 6+ feel no pain is a lot to chew through if you're trying to get those OC6 off of objectives. So far, relatively standard Noble Lance stuff. Knights can play a bunch of different combinations and not really go wrong with their current points values, so no surprise that they had a very good weekend here. Now, with that, we're going to move over to the 40-player Beach Clash Major in Germany. This event saw Chaos Knights absolutely dominating it, with Fred Otto from Breaking Heads coming in undefeated at a 4-0-1 result. It was differential scoring, so those draws are relatively common. However, we also saw Andre Fischer take it down with a 5-0 result running the Chaos Knights. In this case, Andre was playing a Lords of Dread list. This improves the OC characteristic of these knights and gives them a ton of ways to mess with objective control. They can lock in objectives, provide those objectives a passive OC5 if no other units are controlling that objective, and make it very difficult for a lot of smaller, less OC intensive armies to actually interact with them on the primary objective. Now, one interesting thing when you're building a Lord of Dread army is the choice between taking a bunch of super heavies, because this detachment tends to focus very heavily on taking a ton of the big, huge knights, and taking some of the enhancements that they have access to, because the enhancements in this detachment are absolutely cracked. This includes on the Cerastus Knight Atropos here, Mirror of Fates to give him a Lord of Deceit aura, as well as a free command reroll every round. We also have a Knight Despoiler with Warpborn Stalker. That's a carbon copy of Mysterious Guardian, so he's going to be able to hop up and down to get new lines of sight. In this case, we're running double Despoiler Gatling Cannons, but Lords of Dread does have a stratagem for full hit and wound rerolls against opposing Titanic units, so this guy is still a very good inclusion when it comes to knocking down opposing big knights. He's going to be wounding them on 5s with those strength 6 guns. Full rerolls means about a 50% conversion on your wound rolls, plus you're getting full hit rerolls. It's going to be a ton of damage you're chunking off of them. Last and certainly not least, the pièce de résistance here is a Knight Rampager with Throne Mechanicum of Skulls to give him a advance and charge, which allows him to use his to get that guy's insane melee profile into the fight. Now, we've unlocked a little bit of a couple points to take those enhancements by, instead of taking all big knights, we've actually included a couple of allied units as well as war dogs. In this case, we're taking 1 war dog stalker for a little bit of additional shooting, plus 3 war dog carnivores for their aggressive melee. On top of that, we have 2 units of Nurglings for utility and Rodagus, who has great synergy with this detachment because of his ability to mess with your objective control. When you're already taking knights that are
are objective control 12, thanks to the detachment bonus. Having that objective control of enemy units makes it almost impossible to steal primary away from them. And on top of that, you can also utilize him alongside the base OC5 objectives that you're going to be constructing thanks to Claimed for the Dark Gods. And that then, with Rodriguez having opposing OC, makes it almost impossible for smaller utility units to actually steal those objectives away from you, even if you yourself is not on that objective. He's also just about as tanky as a knight. He has less wounds, but more toughness and a better invulnerable save. So against enemies with high impact, high damage weapons, he's actually much tankier. And against the high volume, lower impact weapons, like 2 damage mastercrafted power sword kind of things, you can use the -1 damage stratagem in the detachment to make the knights themselves tanky against that while keeping Rodriguez safe. So the army is able to present a strong defensive line against a wide variety of attack profiles. Now with that, we're going to move over to Larissa, Greece for the Midsummer OPA. This is a 48-player GT and saw undefeated results both from Death Guard as well as Tau Empire. We'll be talking about both of these armies as we progress through the episode, but we're going to start by discussing Death Guard. Liu Guanbo Ilias went undefeated 5-0 with Death Guard, running a virulent Vectorium detachment. This is the, I guess, more sort of Plague Marine focused detachment, I suppose, although it feels like kind of all the detachments are in some case Plague Marine focused in this codex. This gives you access to things like the Demon Prince of Nurgle with revolting regeneration to grant him a 5+ feel no pain on top of his high toughness characteristic, alongside a Lord of Contagion with Furnace of Plagues for +1 damage and devastating wounds on his already powerful 3 damage axe. We're then bringing a Lord of Virulence for hit rerolls in the shooting phase, plus, and the reason that I talk about this list, Mortarion, the big man himself. He's an interesting inclusion in a Death Guard list because he kind of requires very different engagement than any other Death Guard unit. Unlike most Death Guard units where they kind of just like come into the front and then play a very fair game with you, Mortarion messes with that by giving his units fight on death, reactive moves, or reactive shooting, which can make it more difficult to sort of find a profitable way to actually interact with the stuff in the center of the table than you would normally expect. And he's using that, projecting those abilities onto units like a 6-man unit of Death Shroud Terminators. We also have another 3-man unit of Death Shroud Terminators to act as a little bit more of a harassment piece to jump into your opponent's backline. 3 Mephitic Blow Drones with Heavy Blight Launchers to go alongside that Lord of Virulence, plus 2 Mephitic Blight Haulers and 3 units of 10 Poxwalkers. Plus, I should mention as well, 1 unit of 2 Chaos Spawn to sort of round out the list. So the combination of the Fetid Bloat Drones as well as Mortarion is going to kind of take up the middle, provide some shooting, and provide some board control, all hiding behind those Poxwalker screens. We can then do things like jump in the Death Shroud Terminators nearby Mortarion to be affected by his auras, or if you're able to get up far enough with your utility units so that you can contagion other stuff in the opponent's backline, you can get those guys pretty good charges out of Deep Strike. That's going to force your opponent to redirect their attacks into potentially 6 to 9 Death Shroud Terminators, which means that they have commensurately less attacks to deal with Mortarion himself. Now with that, we're going to hump over to Portland, Oregon for the Rose City Rumble. This was a 40-player event and was taken down by Thousand Suns, although it did see an undefeated result from Death Guard, so those guys certainly not going anywhere. Alex Pena took this one down with a Grand Coven list. I like this one because it does have a lot of interesting scoring potential. It's not just focused on pure damage output like we often see from Grand Coven. Now this is including an Exalted Disc Sorcerer with Incandium, so he can attempt a second instance of Doombolt once per game. We also have an Infernal Master with Eldritch Vortex for +1 damage on this Flamer, plus Magnus the Red, standard stuff so far, in addition to a Standard Sorcerer and an Umbralific Crystal Sorcerer to allow his unit to teleport once per game. Now from there, we have 2 individual Zangor Shamans, and in this detachment, these often play individually as little, ritual caddies. They'll run around, they'll perform a ritual, and then usually you can use them to score some points, and then potentially they die, but that's okay. They're only 55 points, they're a relatively fast-moving infantry model, and they have a devastating wounds gun if they ever get to use it, which can chip in a couple points of damage on something if you really need it. Those guys are super useful, and it's nice to see them being played more often. Now from there, we have a unit of 10 Rubric Marines. These usually go alongside the Umbralific Crystal Elemental Sorcerer, so that you have the opportunity from any time over the course of the game, round 1 onwards, to up down that unit, starting your command phase, and bounce them into your opponent's deployment zone, potentially doing crippling damage. So you're for only almost 300 or so points, your opponent has to constantly be considering the threat of this enormous unit just bouncing into the least convenient place on the battlefield for them. And if they don't properly screen it and they don't properly reciprocate against that attack, they might just lose on the spot. If the Rubric Marines you leave them a spot, they can hop in, jump into a relevant position, clear away something with their flamers, use a temporal surge to get on an objective, and then you don't immediately kill them all. They're suddenly in your backline and they're taking your home objective, and there's very little you can do about it. That big unit is a little bit more difficult to engage with than you would normally expect, especially if they are all flamer equipped and you have to engage them in melee. Eating overwatches from that unit could even be horrifying. We have 2 more Rubric Marines to attach into the other characters, a Chaos Rhino to carry them to the battle. Can also embark the Zangor Shamans, which is kind of cool as well because they are infantry keyworded. From there, we have 2 Mutalith Vortex Beasts alongside 2 units of Fatecaster Greatbow Zangor Enlightened, 1 unit of 6 to attach in with the Exalted Disc Sorcerer, 1 unit of 3 just to act as utility, and 2 units of Zangors for utility as well. So we have a little bit less of a focus on raw damage output here. Mutalith Vortex Beasts are nice, but there is only 2 of them. However, we do have a lot of scoring thanks to all of these Fatecaster Greatbow and Zangor units, as well as all of the individual Zangor Shamans. And on top of that, we are then taking that big unit of 10 Rubric Marines, which, while less efficient than playing more smaller units that get more special weapons and a greater access to board control, they are a huge threat your opponent has to position poorly in order to deal with. Now we're back to the Ciudad de Avila, and we are going to talk this time about Alvaro Perez, who went undefeated with Drukhari. Kind of wild to see Drukhari with 2 undefeated out of the woodwork here. I don't know if that's necessarily because of a meta shift. We did see a couple of successful Drukhari lists over the course of the weekend in teams events, but obviously that's a much different format. However, that recent buff to Reaper's Wager definitely, I think, gives a huge bonus to the faction for playing the detachment that they were essentially already playing. In this case, Alvaro was playing a Reaper's Wager detachment, taking an Archon with Arch Raider to give his unit Scout, alongside a Beastmaster to further enhance the forward operation of the army with additional scouts, Drazar for a hard-hitting character when attached to Incubi, Lilith Hesperax for some anti-infantry action, as well as Urian Rakarth to hold down the fort. This is already kind of looking like a Real Space Raid detachment, but it is in fact Reaper's Wager. We then have a unit of Cabalite Warriors, a unit of Witches to attach Lilith Hesperax into. They will likely be split into 5 thanks to one of the Venoms. 10 Hellions. For relatively inexpensive, you get a very fast, hard-hitting unit that makes excellent use of the stratagems within the Reaper's Wager detachment, which can grant them offensive keywords, advance and charge, things like that to further enhance their speed. A very good unit for relatively inexpensive points per model. We have a 5 Incubi squad in order to attach Drazar, 2 units of 5 Mandrakes for utility, some backline shooting provided by a pair of Ravagers, alongside more utility from Reavers, and 3 units of Scourges. That's a combination of 2 Haywire Blaster Scourges, an absolute nightmare for things like Knights, especially because you are almost guaranteed to be hitting vehicles that you can plow mortal wounds into with the Haywire Blaster shots. 1 unit of Dark Lances to hedge your bets against monster-focused armies so that you don't just die if you run into those. And then last but certainly not least, we have a nice little Skyweaver unit from Harlequins in there to helpfully help trade the Reaper's Wager wound rerolls back and forth. But on top of that, it's also just a highly effective, fast unit that can be operate like a utility unit or a disruption piece for not too many points. And they take up a ton of table space. They're very good for screening. They're also good because they can put a ton of OC onto objectives whenever you need to at a fast-paced movement characteristic. So this list is very fast. It hits extremely hard, much harder than you would expect, thanks to all the keywords it can gain from its stratagems, and it has a ton of board control with things like these double scouting Archon plus the Beastmaster units, able to take the midboard, then stage its Bikers and its Hellions into a position where they can then follow up on the subsequent turn and continuously hit your opponent, impact your opponent, and keep them hemmed into their deployment zone, while the rest of your units, like your Cabalite Warriors and Witches inside your Venoms, just hop around and score for the entirety of the game. Now, with that, we're going to return to the Midsummer OPA to talk about Orestes Staub and their Tau Empire. Pretty cool to see Tau Empire with a bunch of success this weekend, or at least some modicum amount of success with multiple undefeateds, after it being kind of drips and drabs for the last couple of months. Now, Orestes here is playing a Kauyon detachment, so the late game focused detachment that did just get clarification in the most recent update, clarifying that its abilities do work Battle Round 3 onwards. There is no way to get them throughout the entire course of the game, but you do get the benefit of the new and improved observer mechanic, so you can observe anytime during your shooting phase. Pretty good, unless of course you run out of things to observe, and then things could go weird for you. But anyway, we've got Commander Shadow Sun in addition to a Cold Star Commander with Exemplar of the Kauyon, so he's going to turn on those Kauyon abilities one battle round earlier than normal. That makes him pretty good at initiating combat. One thing that you don't want to get done is have your opponent swarm you on battle round 2 and have no real way to efficiently deal with them. So having at least one Exemplar of the Kauyon to hop out and gain those sustained hits bonuses to improve their damage output is very important. Usually we see this on a Kadra Fireblade, but I guess now that the effect is only sustained 1 instead of sustained 2, the Breacher team shot is probably a little bit less exciting, but getting those higher impact shooting from the Cold Star unit might be a little bit nicer. We have a single Breacher team in a Devilfish alongside 2 units of individual broadside battlesuits, just one heavy rail rifle guy in each of those. Those are always a little bit of a hair-raising shot. Every time you roll a 6 on those things, it feels a little bit sketchy because you get such a big high-impact shot from those. And we do have a Crisis Sunforged battlesuit team to go alongside that Cold Star Commander. Hopefully that Exemplar of the Kauyon can help shore up their otherwise kind of inaccurate anti-tank shooting. They get wound and damage rerolls, but they lack hit rerolls, so they're kind of just hoping that like reroll 1s to hit from a Stealth 2 unit will help, but sustained hits 1 certainly helps go quite a bit, and that gives you a really early answer to an aggressive vehicle push. We then have a Ghost Keel battlesuit to sort of toilet bowl the game in the middle of the table, plus some forward operation from a Crude Carnivore unit, a Pathfinder team, and a Piranha, and then some actual backline powerful shooting from 2 Riptide battlesuits, those both equipped with ion accelerators, 2 Skyray gunships, as well as support from 2 stealth battlesuit teams and a unit of 5 Vespid Stingwings. Now, the inclusion of that Sunforged team is really interesting. A little bit, I guess, of a nod to the kind of high armor metagame that we're in right now. I know the Sunforges are a little hit or miss, generally speaking, but if we do get access to rerolls plus the Kauyon abilities, we can get some work done with those guys, assuming they can get up close and personal into their melter range. You just have to not miss a bunch of, roll a bunch of 2s to hit, I guess. Now, with that, we're going to move over to the 27-player Warhammer 40k July Open held in Laramie, Wyoming. This event was won by Adam Tricola running Blood Angels, one of the 2 Space Marine chapters that we're going to be covering in this video. And Adam, in this case, was playing a Liberator Assault group, as is probably to be expected. This includes a Captain with Jump Pack, a Chaplain with Speed of the Primarch, probably going into a Blade Guard Veteran squad for +1 to wound on those guys, meaning that with Strength 7, thanks to the Liberator Assault group detachment ability, those guys are going to be winning basically everything in the game on 4s or better, which is a nice place to be thanks to that +1 to wound, especially because the unit bakes in hit rerolls as well, thanks to their blade stance. We have a Chaplain with Jump Pack, as well as Commander Dante, a Combi Lieutenant, and the Sanguinor himself. Now, following that up is a bunch of utility, 3 units of Jump Pack Assault Intercessors. Interestingly, one of them is a 10-man. We do have that Jump Pack Chaplain, so we can give that whole unit +1 to wound by attaching that guy, and that also generates a ton of mortal wounds on the charge, so we can bypass strong defensive technology. If you can get all of the Assault Intercessors into melee, which to be fair is unlikely, they average somewhere around 5 mortal wounds, and the Jump Pack Chaplain has a pretty good shot of dealing another 2 to 3, so you can hit a unit for about 7 damage before you even go in with their attacks, and all those attacks are going to be +1 to wound, plus strength, plus attacks. So as long as you're not hitting something that has really strong base armor saves that will bump up against the AP1 that the entire unit has, besides that Power Fist Sergeant, then they're going to actually do kind of insane damage to basically anything. We then have a Blade Guard veteran squad, so that's for the foot chaplain to go into, 2 Gladiator Lancers for some backline shooting, alongside an Infiltrator squad to protect the home objective from deep strikers, plus 2 Sanguinary Guard squads, a 3 and a 6. Most likely, I think we're going to attach the Jump Pack Captain into the 3-man to give them +1 strength, and then Commander Dante oftentimes goes into the 6-man to give them that little boost of speed. Following that up, we also have a Scout Squad and a Vanguard Veteran Squad for some additional utility. When you're out of regular Jump Pack Assault Intercessors to take, might as well take the Blade Guard Veteran version, or the Vanguard Veteran version, I should say, because they are essentially the same, slightly lower damage output, but they have an invulnerable save as well, and they mostly just act as another instance of that really nice Jump Pack medium infantry profile. Relatively standard stuff here. I do like the inclusion of the additional chaplains. The sort of mortal wound spam chaplain with the Jump Pack is very cool. We don't necessarily need the +1 to wound quite as much on things like the Sanguinary Guard, because the strength can already get super high with the Captain, but you definitely feel the difference when you're swinging Jump Assault Intercessors, especially if you're hitting something like a Cerastus Lancer, which is a toughness 11 enemy. You're going to be wounding them on 5s base because you're strength 6 on the charge with the Assault Intercessors. You don't care about any additional AP because they have a 4+ invulnerable save thanks to their big Ion Shield. And the +1 to wound brings you to wounding on 4s. So this unit of 10 guys plus a chaplain's attacking somewhere around 56 times. And all of those are putting it on its invulnerable save, wounding on 4s. So the chances that you knock the unit down by itself, or at least do 10 or 15 damage, is pretty high. And especially if you've connected a Lancer shot on the way in, you may be able to just nuke a knight with that charge. So I think it definitely, that strength 6 AP1 profile definitely feels to me like an answer to something like a T11 vehicle. It's just such a perfect breakpoint to make those Jump Pack Intercessors kill something big, especially alongside the mortal wounds we're going to be dealing on the charge and at the start of the fight phase thanks to the chaplain. It just feels like a match made in heaven to me. I really like the inclusion of this little unit here. I think that's really cool. Now, sticking with Ultramarines, let's go over to Reno, Nevada for the Silver State Major 2025. This was a 57-player event, and it was won by Chase Chappell running Ultramarines, going 6-0. Now, Chase was playing an Ultramarines list, but it wasn't any Ultramarines list. This list is actually kind of insane. First of all, it's a Firestorm Assault Force, which is a man after my own heart. I absolutely love this attachment. I think it's so cool. It gives the entire army assault, as well as +1 strength where they target enemies within 12 inches of them. So as long as they're trying to get up close and personal with their opponent, they get that nice little strength bonus. Now, when you compound this with basically any additional damage bonus, it goes crazy, which we can do in Ultramarines because we have Robute Gilliman, who can issue a second instance of Oaths of Moment. So we have a Combat Lieutenant to basically staple to Gilliman's butt and give him a permanent load operative so he can wander around and do whatever he wants. We then have a Justiciar with Champion of Humanity. That makes he and his unit's characteristics and roles unmodifiable. Full stop. Unlike many of these styles of enhancements where it only affects your hit rolls, for example, or your wound rolls, it doesn't affect your characteristics or it doesn't affect specific kinds of rolls. This one affects everything but saving throws, which is wild. So that means that the unit can't be armor of contempted, they can't be damage reduced. There's a huge number of benefits to it. So the big benefit here is that if we're going especially into things like other Space Marines, they can't armor of contempt you, that's huge. The unit is largely AP2, so an armor of contempt, especially into a high base save enemy, can really blank a unit like Blade Guard Veterans or the Justiciar's attacks himself. If you're going into something like Lords of Dread that has a -1 damage stratagem on them, that can't modify their attacks, so suddenly you're still hitting them for the same number of damage as they would normally. That's a huge benefit to a unit like that. Now, we do have a 6-man Blade Guard Veteran squad for that guy to hop into. You can also use Crucible of Battle on this unit, so they have an instance of +1 to wound without needing an Oath of Moment from Gilliman, which is a big benefit, as well as the fact that they have their own reroll hits baked in. It's not as effective as Oath of Moment, but it's definitely not bad. So we have the opportunity to target 2 big scary units with 2 separate Oaths of Moment to grant that +1 to wound and reroll benefit. Then the Blade Guard Veterans can kind of operate independently and go do their own thing. We then have 2 individual Eradicator squads, just 3 apiece of those, to not nuke some vehicles. Interestingly, and I love this inclusion, 2 Firestrike servo turrets. These are each equipped with a twin las talon. So it's a base strength 10 las cannon that gains twin linked. It also gains +1 strength when it attacks within short range, and every weapon in the army has assault. So you can actually advance these things around the battlefield. When they're shooting at close range, they go to strength 11. So they're wounding things like knights on 3s with twin linked, which means the chance that they actually convert their attacks is relatively high. If you're Oath of Momented, it gets even better. They're then wounding on 3s with rerolls and rerolls to hit. So you're most likely getting both of those hits through for only 75 points on a relatively resilient chassis. The downside is that they are kind of slow on the battlefield, but you can just strategic reserve them and use them off the side, which is just fine. We then have an Infiltrator Squad, 2 Invader ATVs with multi-meltas for utility and a little bit of additional damage. We have a Land Raider Redeemer. This guy is probably going to be carrying the Eradicators around. It may also be being used to deliver the Justiciar as well, but you can choose that at the table. Or even take a combination. I think you have enough spots to fit one Eradicator Squad as well as the Blade Guard veterans in that thing if you want to, because it has that 14 transport capacity. But this guy is also incredible thanks to Firestorm Assault Force. It's by definition mostly only attacking within 12 inches, which means its Flamestorm cannons go to strength 7 permanently. So they're even wounding toughness 12 enemies on 5s, 4s if you have Oath of Momented them, which is a ton of damage. We then have a Repulsor Executioner for some backline shooting, but also potentially a second transport to get some of these Eradicators or other infantry to the fight. Following that up, we have 3 units of Vanguard veterans with jump packs. These guys have Inferno pistols, which is kind of cute because you are advancing and shooting. You can get up and actually deal some damage with them with their ranged attacks. Otherwise, they operate mostly like jump pack assault intercessors, but they just have an enhanced range profile with that bonus strength if you're able to get them up close and personal, which is kind of a nice little inclusion, especially if you are trying to kind of dump all of your shots into a single target. Oath of Momenting something and running 15 Vanguard veterans into range of it, then shooting them with reroll hits and +1 to wound Inferno pistols is actually going to do kind of a lot of damage, especially if you get into melta range. Now with that, let's move over to Hoghammer GT. This was a 33-player GT held in Rogers, Arkansas. This event was won by Peyton Priest running Genestealer Cults. Peyton was playing a host of Ascension, and I think we talk about this list basically every week. It creeps into an undefeated space. The general consensus is that this list is fairly effective, I think. It's just kind of, I would imagine, sort of a pain to play. I don't know if a lot of people actually want to interface with this kind of style of play, where you're just throwing heaps and heaps of models at your opponent and then respawning them and doing it again. But clearly it is very good, and a lot of really strong players are playing it seriously. It's even better in this kind of metagame where everyone's focusing on killing things like big, huge Imperial Knights that have enormous wounds counts and feel no pains, and so you need to be able to deal high single target damage, and Genestealer Cults are just hopping in here with 60 models at a time and hoping that you don't have the infantry sweeping to actually deal with them. Now this list is playing triple Benefictus, one of them with Assassination Edict, a Biophagus with Our Time is Nigh, plus a second Biophagus, double Kellermorphs, a Primus with chink in their armor, as well as a Reductus Saboteur. We then have a couple of units of Acolyte Hybrids, 2 Hand Flamer units, alongside the requisite enormous number of Neophytes. That's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4 units of 20 Neophyte Hybrids with their combination of ranged weapons. We have a Goliath truck to carry around some of those Acolyte Hybrids to the fight in the early game, plus a pair of Achilles Ridge Runners to apply Crossfire, 2 units of Hybrid Metamorphs to attach those Biophaguses into. I guess we could probably carry those to the front with the truck. I actually imagine that's probably what's happening, to be honest. It gives you a nice little counter punch in the mid board that this detachment actually doesn't normally bring. Usually you kind of just eschew melee entirely and you just play the ranged game, but this list is actually going to do a little bit of mid-board control with those Metamorph units. Plus we have a Pure Train Genestealer Squad to clear out enemy forward operators as well. Definitely a little bit of a unique take on Host of Ascension, because we don't typically see those Biophaguses get played alongside the melee units, so that's really cool to see a little bit of innovation. Oftentimes we would just see those points be taken up by Attilan Jackals, more Pure Strange Genestealer stuff that can fight on turn 1 so that you can clear space for your Neophyte Hybrid bricks to drop on turn 2, but in this case we're actually taking something that's a little bit more melee oriented, which I think is kind of cool. Now with that, let's move over to Wicked Dicey's event for the weekend, the 73-player Ironweld Summer Assault, held in Wakefield, Massachusetts. This event was won by Adeptus Custodes, Matthew Wood taking that faction to a 5-0 record. Matthew was playing a Lions of the Emperor detachment. This included a Blade Champion, Shield Captain, and Alaris Terminator armor with his Castellan Axe and his Abata Mortis to improve his stats, plus Trajan Valoris, because him and Gilded Champion were a match made in absolute heaven, regenerating his Moment Shackle. From there, we had a bunch of individual Custodian Guard squads, which is kind of cool to see. Oftentimes, these will be taken by Custodian Wardens, but instead, we're taking a more offensive version. So that is 3 units of 4 Custodian Guard, each of those equipped with 3 Guardian Spears, 1 Vexilla with a Presidium Shield. So those are going to be base OC3 as long as a Vexilla is in the unit. And the Vexilla oftentimes adds the survivability of another Custodian Guardsman, because more often than not, you're being hit by 3 or D6-ish damage attacks that will likely one-shot each Custodian Guard in the unit. The Vexilla gives a 4th wound to one of those models, allowing him to absorb 1 additional hit before he goes down, making the unit actually about 20% more resilient against a variety of weapons. We then have a unit of 2 Alaris Custodians alongside 2 Caladius Grafs tanks for some backline shooting, a unit of Prosecutors, a unit of Witch Seekers, Inquisitor Kyria Draxus, so we have an attachment for our 3rd Custodian Guard squad, so we have Trajan, Blade Champion, and Draxus, so we can attach all 3 of those. And last but certainly not least, a unit that we haven't seen in a while, 2 Venatari Custodian units. Now, these guys don't see that much play in Lions of the Emperor because they don't have a ton of synergy with the detachment ability. Awkwardly, they have Lance already on their melee weapons, so they don't really gain that much benefit from the detachment. That does mean that they can play with each other, and they don't really lose that much efficiency thanks to being near another friendly unit to then deny the Lions of the Emperor detachment effect of +1 to hit and wound. They also get the benefit on their ranged weapons, which can make their shooting relatively effective. And given the fact as well that we're also presenting potentially like 3 Custodian Guard units, all of them double firing with Sentinel Storm, all of those with +1 to wound if they're not near other friendlies, and also wound rerolls, it actually makes this army fairly good at shooting. So that might be some of the arithmetic there. But also just these guys being able to harass your opponent by hopping in the backline and clearing out their backline stuff really effectively while being difficult to deal with. For a relatively efficient points value, their cost, almost the same as a Custodian Guard squad. Obviously, they get less models, but that jump pack and that rapid ingress for free is a huge deal, especially if you're comboing it with another unit paying to rapid ingress, and you can drop potentially 11 Custodians on your opponent out of nowhere wherever they're not screening effectively, which is turns out pretty good, especially if you can use Kyria Draxus and her unit to clear out their screens on turn 1 while being difficult to engage with shooting attacks because of her concealment effect. Then you can open up a space where you can get a mass rapid ingress later in the game and really hammer your opponent and prevent them from getting to your Caladius Graf tanks so they can roll out to the victory. Cool to see Lions of the Emperor doing well. Very cool to see Adeptus Custodes on here. It's not too often that we see Custodes taking down larger events, but congratulations to Matthew Wood for doing that. Now, with that, we're going to move over to Edmonton, Alberta for the 29-player Nemesis 40k summer event. This event was won by Scotty B, who was playing Necrons to a 5-0 result with some pretty high scores as well. Now, Scotty was running an Awakened Dynasty build with 1 million characters, and we've probably seen similar builds to this in the past. So let's run through it. We have a Catacomb Command Barge with a Resurrection Orb, so +1 OC Aura for him, alongside a Hexmark Destroyer for a little bit of utility, Illuminor Seraz to buff battle line units and be another annoying lone operative with an insane Feel No Pain, Imhotep the Stormlord for CP generation to fuel things like your Reactive Reanimates and your Resurrection Protocol or Protocol of the Eternal Revenant that we have on the characters, plus Orican the Diviner, so we're going to probably see a Warrior Brick here in a moment, in addition to a Plasmancer, and Royal Warden, a Scorpic Lord with an Agic Dermal Bond, so another 4+ Feel No Pain character that can be very difficult to deal with, and a second Scorpic Lord for some additional melee. We have 1 unit of 5 Immortals. I have a sneaking suspicion that we are going to attach the Plasmancer into those for enhanced critical hits. so that they could go and just clear out enemy utility on objectives really efficiently. You get some pretty solid shots from the Plasmaster. You get the re-rolling shots from the Immortals as well if you're targeting enemies on objectives, and those are all critting on 5s with their lethal hit Scout Blasters. Plus, you get a couple mortal wounds out of the Plasmaster as well to start that process off, and that's just for 125 points. Just a nice little kind of utility unit. We have the Royal Warden, I should mention, has the Netherrealm Casket, so he's going to provide stealth to his unit, and he's likely dual attaching with Orokin the Diviner into this Necron Warrior Squad. So they're getting a 4+ invulnerable save. Orokin can give them a spike of melee damage if they need to, with his stars are aligned. Then the Royal Warden can give them the ability to fall back and operate. So even if you engage this unit, you're going to kill a couple of them because they're very difficult to actually push through. They're going to reactive reanimate from thanks to the Ghost Arc, thanks to the Resurrection Orb on the Catacomb Command Barge, and also thanks to the Stratagem. So they're going to be reanimating a ton of models back into that unit. Then even if they're still engaged there, they just fall back and they shoot you. On top of that, they can also be buffed up to OC3 thanks to the Catacomb Command Barge being nearby. So that unit's going to be absolutely dominant on primary objectives. Now, following that up, we have a Canoptek Reanimator, a Canoptek Spider unit, plus a Ghost Arc. I think I mentioned that as well earlier. We are protecting that with the Canoptek Spider for a 6+ Feel No Pain on that thing. The Reanimator is obviously important to constantly be reanimating more warriors into that warrior squad. We have a Cryptothrall unit, which is probably going to attach in with Orokin the Diviner, if I had to imagine, to give more wounds to the warrior squad. A Doomsday Arc, 2 units of 3 Scorpek Destroyers to attach the Scorpek Lords into, and a little bit of utility being provided by 2 units of 3 Tomb Blades. It's been a while since we've seen Tomb Blades. It's actually wild because they're so fast, especially when they are taking Tesla carbines, which they are. They can scout 9, advance, shoot, and move again. So they're almost perfect at scoring any sort of maneuver secondary you would ever want to. They're also kind of tough to kill. Their defensive stats are really weird, and they are OC2 apiece, thanks to being kind of big mounted guys. So they can steal objectives fairly well too. A very good disruption piece on top of that. Been a while since we've seen them, but for only 75 points, they still seem like kind of a steal. Otherwise, mostly the standard stuff we would expect to see from this style of Awakened Dynasty build, with a bunch of characters and that big, huge brick of Necron warriors. Now, with that, we're going to move over to Las Cruces, New Mexico, and talk about the Geek Shack Farewell Taylor GT. This was a 33-player GT and was won by Adrian Lopez, running Orks, and not just any Orks, but the new and improved Cult of Speed. Now, first of all, what does Cult of Speed actually do? Now with the new buffs from the July or the June update, I should say, you're allowed to both advance, fallback, shoot, and charge. Do all of it anytime you want. No necessity to be in a walk turn. You are just going to be advancing and charging all the time, which makes it a very good detachment for disrupting the opponent. You can constantly be getting things like mounted units on the opponent's army. It should mention that this is only applicable to Speed Freak stuff, Cult of Speed stuff, which is going to largely focus on your light vehicles and your mounted units, which is most of the focus of the army. Now, what are we taking in the list? This starts with a Beast Boss Snickrot, so we already have a little bit of Lone Op utility from that guy, as well as a pair of Def Killa War Trikes. No enhancements on any of these characters. We have a Beast Boys unit to attach that Beast Boss into, so we have a little bit of anti-monster, anti-vehicle punch to support the faster elements of the army. We're running a pair of trucks, one of them probably going to be carrying that Beast Boy unit to the battle. We then have a single Boomdak, a Snazwagon. This is kind of a little bit of a support piece. It provides a -1 to hit effect for enemy non-monster, non-vehicle within 6 inches of it, which is a big aura. It's kind of like the old Nurgling aura, which does make it possible to mess with enemy melee armies because you can kind of use it to protect your melee units as they're either moving up into the battle or they've already engaged, and you can kind of get the Snazwagon into the scrum to then mess with enemy counterattacks, which is a pretty interesting piece of technology there. We also have 2 Break-A-Boys squads to go into the second truck alongside 18 Defcoptas. Now, the Defcoptas are key to this detachment because they are Cult of Speed keyworded, and they bring some pretty hefty shooting to the fight. So they have all synergy with all of the stratagems, and they're bringing, each unit is taking 4 rocket shots alongside 2 custom Mega Blaster shots. Any of these can be buffed by some of the stratagems inside the detachment, including Storm or Blitzifier. The Blitzifier granting lethal hits and critical 5-ups if you target enemies within 9 inches. Storm granting you sustained hits 1 or sustained 2 when you target enemies within 9 inches. Again, you're trying to get up close and personal with these units to then turn on those effects. Both of those are relatively easy to trigger, and then when they're affecting a unit firing a ton of these big sort of anti-tank high-value profiles, that can be a big deal, and you can use on potentially both or 2 of the Defcopter units a turn. One of them with lethal hits, one of them with sustained hits, both of which are going to be probably relatively similar value. We have Gretchen to sit in the backline and generate command points to fuel those combos, alongside 2 units of Tank Busters to add some additional anti-tank shooting, potentially coming out of a truck. Unfortunately, the trucks themselves aren't Speed Freak keyworded, despite the fact that they are in Speed Freaks, the video game. So what's up with that, G-Dub? Answer that. That would make some pretty cool synergy with those stratagems, but unfortunately, they can't just act as a big firing deck platform or hop out and actually shoot vehicles with all of their own special abilities as well. So it's definitely not upsetting to take more Tank Busters, especially in a meta when we're fighting just tons and tons of monsters and vehicles constantly. We then have a lot of disruption in the form of 2 Warbiker squads. Now, the Warbikers can join in with the Defkiller War Trikes, who give them flat 6 advances. And again, you can advance, shoot, and charge in this detachment because Warbikers are Speed Free keyworded, meaning that they can get up close and personal with those Dagger shots, soften up the opponent, and then charge in and put a ton of OC on objectives. You then can follow that up with the Boom Dagger Snazwagon, and suddenly you're pushing a ton of T6 bodies into your opponent's face that they have to get rid of with -1 to hit, most likely, if you haven't killed that Snazwagon first. So you may have to direct attacks to the Snazwagon, which messes your target priority. All the while, you're trying to deal with 2 units of really beefy infantry, I guess kind of 5 units of infantry between the Breaker Boys, the Tank Busters, and the Beast Snagger Boys, plus these Defcopters that are going to be hovering around and piling damage into you. This detachment is absolutely wild. You have so much aggression, you have so much forward momentum that if your opponent can't officially deal with each one of those waves, the Warbikers into the infantry, into the shooting elements in the backline, they're just going to get overrun and they're just going to get pushed entirely out of scenario. And honestly, that's like the biggest benefit of Speed Freaks, and it's so cool that we're starting to see this detachment see some play, because almost army-wide advance and charge permanently is a huge detachment ability to be giving away. And the fact that they gave it to this detachment, but it saw very little play after that update was released, was pretty mind-blowing. And it's cool to see it's starting to get a little bit of a look at. I imagine that once we start to see some of the upper echelon elements of the metagame kind of knocked down a peg, we may see lists like this do very well. Once we're no longer dealing with like an inundation of Death Guard and Imperial Knights and Chaos Knights, weird detachments like Cult of Speed could come up and be the next stage of the metagame evolution, which I'm absolutely here for. But with that, those are all of the best armies in Warhammer 40k for this week. Let me know down in the comment section which one is your favorite. Big thanks to Wicked Dicey and their Summer Slaughter event for sponsoring this video. Thanks for you for watching all the way to the end of the video. If you'd like to support the content, please consider supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, YouTube channel members and Twitch subscribers. I got a bunch of games from the ACO event uploaded to both my YouTube channel membership and my Patreon. If you want to go check those out, you get some additional battle reports, some additional content for your trouble, and it helps me keep the lights on over here. But at the very least, watching is good enough. Remember to keep it classy, folks. Have happy wargaming, and I'll see you in the next one.